Welcome back to the My Latin Life podcast. Since 2014, My Latin Life has been your trusted guide to traveling and living in Latin America. My guest today is James Lennertz. He's an American expat in Brazil. He's been in Brazil 10 plus years, something like that. So in this episode, we're going to get kind of that long-term expat perspective, someone that's fully integrated into the culture, and we're going to get a lot of intel on southern Brazil as well. So James, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Vance. Nice to be here.
Absolutely. I'm curious, do you drink the chimarrão, the yerba mate
Chimarrão? Yeah.
in southern Brazil? You drink that stuff?
Yeah. Chimarrão. It's very important that you assimilate to the culture. Yeah. So I do that. I have nice cachaças in the house. I like cachaça velha, and we have some very fine ones down here in the south. Some very, very old age, like Armazém Vieira up in Santa Catarina. Topaz is 32 years aged.
Oh, I didn't know that. You
Yeah,
did that.
it's outstanding. And then here in where I'm living currently, Rio Grande do Sul, we've got Weber House, and I always have a bottle of 6-year age Weber House in in my home here. So
There you go. That's the
yeah,
rec for the audience. You got to get the Weber House. And that's a
yeah,
cachaça?
yeah, cachaça.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, artisanal. So it's done on a copper still. I. This is how entrenched it is if you're not living heavily expat, which I don't. I live very brasileiro, right? Um, I can go down to the Soki, the butcher shop, which from here in town in Porto Alegre, I can walk to 4 or 5 different butcher shops within 5 minutes from my front door.
Nice.
And one of them, I can buy a large plastic bottle of artisanal cachaça for the equivalent of $4.50, 2 liters of it, and it's good quality, right? So,
Wow.
yeah,
That'd be well over $100 in Canada. James,
yeah.
I wanted. Do you prefer James or Jim?
You know what? You can call me anything you want to. Here literally I'm Jim or James, and then I'm like, it's easier. James translates to Chiago. You can call me Chiago. So yeah, so you can call me whatever you want. Whatever is easiest for you,
I'm
Vance.
gonna go with James. I'm gonna go with the Bible version. So,
Okay.
um, James, I thought maybe to kick things off, we could just get a little bit of a background for the audience on your story. I guess the short version about kind of
Okay.
how you ended up in Brazil, how you ended up in the state of Rio Grande do Sul, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah. Let's see. Uh, Not born, but raised in California from a young age. Southern California, so the border was always there. My dad was a big game fisherman, so in and out of Mexico, Baja early, right? Um, Before Cabo was Cabo. Uh, that just kind of continued off and on. I was in Costa Rica, geez, 91. you know, Too many gringos there for me at that time in Tamarindo, and there was I didn't see any other. I saw 2 other gringos when I was there. Now it looks like Huntington Beach, which is the area I'm from in California. Um, There's a lot of Peruvians and Colombians in Southern California, although most people associated that they were Mexicans, right? And Salvadorians and everybody else. But if they spoke Spanish in the Southern California I grew up in, you were a Mexican, right? Unfortunately, that not unfortunately for someone thinking somebody else is Mexican, but that the American mentality wasn't open to there being more than one culture in Latin America, right? Spanish speaking. So um, I had Peruvian friends. I cooked Peruvian food. My kids, one of my son, American adult now, worked in a Peruvian restaurant with a good friend of mine because he knew all the dishes and stuff, and he spoke Spanish, right? So I was always part of Latin culture in Southern California, and then Brazil happened to me, right? um, I was early on trip into Chile. Actually, I thought I'd go to Peru, but I ended up going to Chile because I saw a Google Map aerial photo of Chile, and it looked like California. And I was at a point in my life I wanted to be far away from California, but someplace that felt comfortable. Right.
Hmm.
At that time, I started hearing rumblings about Brazil, and then I came across an Economist magazine, either right before or right after my first trip to Brazil. It was Christ the Redeemer taking off of the mountaintop in Rio on the front of the Economist magazine, right? And it said Brazil Rising. And I came from a hardcore consulting background. I worked in the IT practice at one of the big four firms, global consulting accounting firms.
Hmm.
And they were talking about if you spoke Brazilian Portuguese and were American educated, had a experience, you could expect to see 2x pay. And I was looking for an out and came to Brazil, and the love affair began. Right, every chance I
Sweet.
could, I'd come to Brazil. I saw I the crazy old consultant from California, from very corporate world, suddenly became the smart guy that everybody wanted to talk to. So my old group approached me about running a big project in Sao Paulo, um, and you know, life happened. I ended up not doing that because of an issue with my health, but I continued being absorbed by Brazil. And that led me to Florianopolis, and Florianopolis captured me for a long time. And then I met my now wife, right? She's a Gaúcha. Uh, Anybody who knows anything about, well, so for instance, I'm talking in an expat forum right now, right? So Lonely Planet, basically, the one description I read, Lonely Planet about Porto Alegre was nothing there, dangerous, don't go, right?
Hmm.
um, I've got a love affair with this city now. The city is very interesting. The culture here is very different than a lot of Brazil, right?
Mm.
Because we're so we're gauchos, right? We're on the northern extent of the Pampas. When I stand on the hills here in town, I can look across the lake, which is huge. I mean, we're talking miles across and miles long. That
Hmm.
will end up ultimately 120, 150 miles southeast of Porto Alegre, which is an inland port. It opens up right on the Uruguay border into the Atlantic, right?
Yep.
So it's a tough port town. Think Sacramento, California, right? Stockton, California. Um, but it's got culture. It's got deep culture. Um, we've got beautiful old architecture, big giant parks, and a reputation. So it's not too crowded, and I rarely
Hmm.
hear English or see anybody that's American, other than people that come to visit me. So,
And
yeah.
how long have you been full time in Brazil now?
Other than when I had to be in the US for work, 12 and a half years.
12 and a half years, not bad.
Yeah.
And all
Yeah.
that between Floripa and Porto Alegre.
Yeah. Yeah. But also traveling. I mean, I literally traveled to 22 states in Brazil. There's very few places I have not at least spent 3 days. I won't mention the city, but I got there and I thought I'd stay 3 weeks, and I ended up spending 3 days. That's why I used the 3 day reference. I'm like, no, I was fairly good in Brazil at that point, but I was like, no, there's no reason for me to be here. Right. So I left. So, yeah.
Hmm. Okay.
Um,
That's a
yeah.
good background. I would love to kind of get into some juicy topics, see if we can
Go ahead.
stir up some mid-level controversy. Yeah, controversy. Um, I know you wanted to talk about assimilation, and
Yeah.
you've definitely probably seen in your time in Brazil, Americans that come down, they don't really learn the language. They kind of don't really know what's going on. It's almost like if you don't know the language, like your head's kind of in a cloud. I'm guessing you're 100% fluent at this point. Tell me about kind of your philosophy on assimilation.
Well, first of all, let me give you a caveat on the 100% fluency. There are technical things here that I still don't get all
All
of the
right,
words,
98,
right?
98.
Yeah, I mean, I'm completely functional in 99, 98, 99% of the time. But, you know, by education, I'm a chemist and I got an MBA in finance. So to have a high level conversation, about efficient bullet theory in finance or, hybridization models in chemistry, I'm not going to have those in Portuguese. So, yeah, assimilation. Let me take it from a counter perspective, right? Let me flip it. I'm an American, right? Americans get angry when Spanish speakers come to the United States and can't speak English, right? They get in their face. They're not very nice. But typically, expats, Americans in particular, think that they don't need to speak the local language. They don't need to incorporate. In fact, most of them gravitate to areas where there's always expats around, right? I'm not that guy. I live in a city where since I came, I was in the United States for an extended period because of COVID, and then there was a death in my family that I had to deal with. I was, part of getting through the estate. So I've been back here since that time, 2.5 years, and I've heard three people speak English, only one of them an American, right? And that American was my niece that visited, right? Um, but I can tell you that if I go up to Florianopolis, I'm not going to hear many Americans speaking Portuguese there, right? I don't think there's a big commitment there. And then they seem to get upset when someone can't speak English. Or the other thing you'll hear is, well, that's not the way we do it in the United States. Well, yeah, you're not in the United States, you're in Brazil, right? So get over it and don't be offended and don't be arrogant. And, you know, Brazilians are the most friendly people you've ever met.
Mm-hmm.
So I just don't get that whole thing. If you want to live in another culture, assimilate. Period. I have no tolerance for it.
Mm-hmm. Let me. I want to kind of visualize what life in Porto Alegre looks like. So, my understanding is it's a metro area of about 4 million people. I think the city proper is like 1.7 million, which would
Yeah,
put it at a city of a similar size to Montreal or maybe Guadalajara, or I'm trying to think of a US city with like 4 million people. Um, but so obviously a pretty big city. It's been on the
yeah,
list of murder capital cities for a long time, dude. Like every year, right? For the past
yeah,
15 years, I feel like usually a lot of cities like they have a war and then so they're on the list and then they drop off the list. I feel like Porto Alegre's like been on that list consecutively for
yeah.
15
But so is
years.
Baltimore.
Yeah.
So has St. Louis. So
Yeah.
has Detroit. But nobody talks about those cities and
So
people
can
that live.
someone can you explain to me something maybe because I've never had anyone kind of like unveil this for me. If because obviously this is southern Brazil, it's kind of the more European civilized part of
Yeah,
Brazil, and
and
Porto
we are.
Alegre and Porto Alegre is kind of like an exception to that in a way. Why is that the case?
There's several reasons. I will tell you that I'm being transparent. Okay, I'm not trying to blow smoke up, your posterior aspect with this. Um, I had an Uber driver killed a couple hundred yards from my home. Right?
You had him killed?
No, I didn't have him killed. He was killed. Right? Could I have
Yeah.
him killed? Yeah, that's probably. Yeah, I could. You could probably easily do that, but you can do that in Mexico, right? I mean, if you pay the right guy, someone's going to
I'm joking. I'm
disappear.
joking.
But that's not the point, right? The point is that it happened at 3:30 in the morning, right? Who has any good reason to be out at 3:30 in the morning? And I like I said, I gravitate towards areas that are, off limits to most expats, right? Because I like it. I could 10 minutes, not even 10, yeah, 10 minutes I can be in probably the worst neighborhood in Porto Alegre, right? But I'm not out at 3 a.m. I'm not doing those kinds of things. And quite frankly, the violence here, you're you're doing either something really stupid or you're a criminal. That's where it's all focused.
But why? Where does it come from? Is it because it's a port city, and so it's like control of the port, or what's actually?
No, it's not. It's not even control of the port. Here's the thing, and most people don't understand this about Rio Grande do Sul. This state is very, very, very independent, right? Um, we're in the south, so while it's tough to get firearms in Brazil, it's easiest to get them in the south. Santa Catarina and this area, easy, right? And then the criminal element, they've always got them. So yeah, it's part of the culture here. We are tough a tough group of people, right? We fought effectively. We fought one 10-year war to be an independent country, right, against Brazil. We fought a 3 or 4 day war in the 1880s, and we've had one or two other uprisings that were probably lasted, a day or two, but they weren't really violent, right? And we're also freedom fighters. Like when when we lost our war for independence in 1845, those people, the leaders, Giuseppe Garibaldi and his wife Anita, they went to Uruguay and helped them fight for their independence. And then they went to Italy. In fact, if you go to Rome, there's a statue of Anita, right next to the Vatican, right? It was put up by Mussolini, don't get me wrong, right? As a freedom fighter, and he did it because he was getting back at the Pope. But there's a strong tradition of, standing up for what's right and protecting your stuff here. And that's how it is, but again, it's really the criminal element where that the murder's going on. I've had in the entire time, starting, I was traveling to Brazil, 2005-ish on, right? I've had one incident where I had an issue, right? And I'll share it if you don't mind.
Go for it.
We had a sick cat and we needed to go to the vet at 2 a.m, right? So we go to a 24-hour vet here in Porto Alegre, and we walk out, have to leave the cat overnight. We should have stayed in the lobby waiting for the Uber, but the Uber looked like he was 1 minute away. So we walked out the door, right? And the guy closed the door. I heard it click behind us, and I thought, maybe this isn't smart. And then the guy went up the stairwell back up to the top floor, because the bottom floor was a pet shop and the top floor was the veterinary clinic, right? Uh-huh. And yeah, and then all of a sudden, it's winter. So I'm in Porto Alegre. This is the Brazil most people don't understand. It's single digit here in the winter at night, right? It's cold. And I've got my down jacket. I unzip it, wrap it around my wife in front of me because she's kind of shivering. And I look at the corner, and around the corner comes this guy in a pair of shorts, a tank top, and Avianas, flip-flops. And I'm like, oh, shit. Right? Sorry if I can't say that word on your podcast. And he walked up, and, he wanted money, and he looked, like he was doing drugs. And I looked at him. I said, hey, I paid for the sick animal with a card. All I've got is, the change in my pocket. And I gave it to him. It was like 3 reais, so like 60 cents. And my wife reached into her purse and gave him 2.5 reais. And then the Uber the Uber pulled up and we got in. The guy took off, and the Uber driver's like, "What the hell was that?" I'm like, "I think I just got robbed," right? But it could have gotten ugly because the guy was looking at me going, and I knew that area. I was right on the border, right? I
Mm,
was right on the border between a good neighborhood across the street from the veterinary clinic, and the neighborhood behind the clinic was a bad neighborhood, and I knew it. And I shouldn't have been out on that street at 2 a.m. That's
mm.
the only time I've had an issue here. Could I have gotten murdered? Yeah, probably. Did I know? But was I
And
stupid? Hell yes.
yeah, it happens. That could have easily happened in California. I'm curious,
Uh,
where do you live in, like the richest sort of like international gringo area, or are you kind of in the
no.
city? Are you like sort of in the mountains? Because you mentioned you're up on a hill, right?
Yeah. So if you look at Porto Alegre, there's the upper city and the lower city, and literally there's one neighborhood called uh, Cidade Baixa, right?
Uh huh.
Lower. And so I live on a hill, but I live in the lowest quality neighborhood on the hill,
Why?
right? Mostly because we used to live in a better neighborhood pre COVID, right? But it was a leased building. And I was stuck in the US because of health reasons. I literally left Brazil. I was here for Christmas, right? I was watching stuff on YouTube about this new thing called COVID that was breaking out in China in December. And I'm looking at my wife going, I don't know if this is good. This could be really bad, right?
Hmm.
And I left Porto Alegre and flew home, California. If you live in a place for 40 plus years, it's kind of home in your head for a long time.
Hmm.
Um, that was January 31st, the beginning of COVID, right? And at the time, I had an issue with my heart, and so luckily I'm fully recovered now. But at that time, I was like, I don't know what the hell's going on, and I had a conversation with my wife, and she's got a son who's autistic and only speaks Portuguese, and we made the family decision. She's going to stay here, and I'm going to stay there until it's good for me to come back, right? Because I could work there and make money. So um, when the lease ran out, she moved into a house that we own, right? And it's in a marginal neighborhood. We were renting it out, but I'm gonna move. But after the flood we had here May June, I've changed where I'm going to move. I was going to move into quite possibly the best neighborhood in the city, up on top of a hill, Moinhos, but I want some land. I want to make sure this is the other part of the expat thing, because I think we all have been given a gift, right? We're living in a time of transition where we can live internationally, and we don't have to be so married to a country that we can't move. We can't go where's best for us, right? So coming through that flood, which if it had happened in LA, there would have been people killing each other in the streets. If something similar, I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands of people homeless and their
Yeah,
house
the
5 and 6
flooding was
feet
insane for the
underwater.
audience. Maybe some of our audience saw it on Twitter, but the flooding in Porto Alegre was absolutely insane.
Yeah, yeah, and it's the hydrology here, right? 2/3 of the water that fall in this state flow right past this city, and then it enters a freshwater lake that has a very small exit to
Yeah.
the
Is it fresh water?
lagoon.
The Lagoa dos
Well,
Patos?
the lago is fresh water, and then Lagoa de Patos, which is the lower
Uh-huh.
portion. There's a very small connection there, so the water backs up in Porto Alegre because all
Uh,
the water comes in. The river when it comes in here, the Guaíba, is over a mile wide,
uh,
and it's deep, and it fills up and it sits there. So the previous flood of this magnitude was 1941, and once it flooded, and it was a couple meters lower than this event, right? Um, we didn't get below flood stages in 41 for 45 days. This time we were 60 days in before we got to where we weren't at flood stages. And so there was just incredible flooding here. And it wasn't like it was going to be gone in a week, right? And so this everybody I was amazed on how well the state did. This it wasn't just Porto Alegre, all the way upriver, was just messed up.
Hmm.
So yeah, I've changed my mind. Like I've reoriented myself to becoming as energy independent, food independent, and everything else. And I do some stuff in agriculture, so I have that ability to do that, right?
So you don't want to
Um,
be like right in the city because I'm looking at the neighborhood you mentioned, Moinhos Juventud,
yeah,
um, and it's like right in the city. It's pretty near the
yep,
airport, but it's like
yeah.
very, very
So
urban. So you don't want to be there. You want to be somewhere
no, no,
local.
no. Actually, if you look to the south of where you're looking at right now,
Hmm.
the southern part of the city is really rural. You could have 5 acres.
Cavaliada, Villanova, this kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, if you look out along the lake,
Uh-huh.
if you look at
Anema.
Ipanema,
Hmm.
right, which is just south of one of the professional soccer stadiums, actually the stadium that we were a host city for the World Cup. That's how
Hmm.
urban we are, right? Relative in Brazil, there's only 6 cities that had World Cup games. We
Hmm.
were one of them. It might have been 8. Could be wrong on that. Um, But if you go down there and then you go inland a little bit, there's all kinds of land and it's high enough, right? So I could get 5 acres, whatever, and basically I can produce all my own food. I would have the ultimate man cave on that too, right?
Yeah, that'd be
So
cool.
yeah, because I I came from a construction development background. That's how I paid my way through school.
Mm.
So I'm a carpenter. So I like to build stuff, and I like to have table saws and everything else, so I can build my own stuff. And I have no problems pulling electrical. So I'm 62 now. By the time I'm 65, I just want to be building stuff and being part of the community. And that was the other thing with the flood is I saw how tight the community pulled together. You know,
Hmm.
the I live in a 4-story building now, and the little kids in the neighborhood, the schools were closed because people were sleeping in them, right, all over the city.
Mm.
And little kids were helping older people get their groceries up and down, and the water, because the water was shut off for weeks here. It was a week? No, it was 9 days, because our water treatment got flooded, right, and it took a week to build a perimeter around it, pull the water out of it, and then repressurize the system. So we had little kids. I say little, pre-high school, carrying 4 5 liter bottles of water up 3 and 4 flights of stairs to make sure everybody had water in the community.
Let me do a mini pivot here to just
Yeah,
cultural differences between California versus Porto Alegre, because you're kind of mentioning there kids helping out, something you really don't see in the U.S. Um,
yeah.
but maybe could you tell me like some of the cultural differences that you see or that you try to explain to your American family about? Maybe there's more emphasis on family in Brazil, I'm guessing, or things like that. Like, what are some of the big cultural differences?
So I came from a traditional American family where we ate at least one meal together every week, multi generationally, right? That does not exist in California. It hasn't existed for a long time. Here in southern Brazil, and almost all of Latin America that I've traveled to, and like I spent significant time in Panama, Colombia, um, Peru, Chile, uh, Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, and Brazil, and it's the same. Family is first. Relationships are first, right? Doing business at a significant level here, many Americans find hard because relationship first, then we do business, right? Um, I was listening to your podcasts, right,
Mhm.
this morning as I was walking, and you guys were talking about real estate, and I think it was Sam Miller. You mentioned MLS, right? MLS service, multi-listing service, and that doesn't exist here. And he made a comment. Well, there's a lot of people here that do business the old way, and it's always been that way, and it's going to be hard to change. It's because it's all relationship based. And so what you see very family oriented, very deep business relationships. And well, I have to be aware of what's going on, right? I don't live in a false state of security because the culture, I know that, using your point, Porto Alegre is always on the murder capital list, right? But everybody's oriented towards family. Everybody takes care of each other in time of need. There is poverty, there's all that shit. But if somebody needs a hand, it's not an issue, right? I mean, it's done all the time. But I say that, and then I have to give you another thing. I feel safer in Porto Alegre than I do in downtown Los Angeles, and I felt that way for 15 years. And the last time I was in downtown Los Angeles, oh my god, right? It was just absolutely it was disgusting and
Hmm.
scary. Because I went downtown to the warehouse district to see a friend, and it was incredibly bad.
Hmm.
And there's no place in Porto Alegre like that.
Random question: is Porto Alegre a city where you could stay in the historic center? Because some cities you really don't want to do that. In Porto Alegre, could you do that or not? Where should people get their Airbnb?
Well, okay, so if somebody wants to get an Airbnb, I would look in Moños, but Moños is expensive. Well, not even. I mean, you can get a like an Ibis hotel
Uh-huh.
in Moños or Auxiliadora, which is right next door. I think it's actually I think it's
Sure, sure.
technically
Yeah, the
Auxiliadora.
Ibis is cheap, $45 a night or something.
Yeah, yeah, it's cheap, and it's good enough quality. You could stay at a very nice place for 100. You can get an Airbnb for less than that. I would be looking. Petropolis is a good neighborhood, right? Bonfim is a good neighborhood. Auxiliadora is a good neighborhood. Uh, Moños is fine. Centro, uh, let me lay it out to you.
Yep.
In 1964, are you aware of what happened in Brazil?
Dictatorship?
Yeah. And do you know who ordered that to happen?
Tell us.
LBJ. Lyndon Baines Johnson, President of the United States. You can actually listen to him do it on a recording that was released by the Library of Congress about 4 years ago,
Hmm.
right? And that military stayed in power until 1985. I think Porto Alegre got shit on for about 20 years because the military held a grudge, right? We're the guys who fought wars not to be Brazilians, right? And so I think the city got pretty ran down during that period. So in 85, it was still under this beating that it endured for 20 plus years. And the Renaissance has just started. Like we're seeing redevelopment now along the waterfront, although it just got flooded. But like all the old warehouses are going to be co-working and apartments and beautiful. We had gone to someone in the family's birthday party at a beautiful restaurant. My American niece visited in November, and we went down there, and she's like, "Oh my God, this is beautiful!" Right? And that's starting. But would I stay in Centro right now unless I was Brazil hardened? No, I probably wouldn't even stay in Centro. Right? I would stay up the hill, but I can walk up the hill into the better neighborhoods from Centro in 5 minutes. Right? So,
Hmm. Speaking of niece visiting, I'm sure people kind of visited you over the years. What do the Americans say when they come down? What do they observe?
for Porto Alegre,
Sure, just wherever you see them.
oh, it's funny. I'll give you a story about my niece. She she lived in Europe for a while. She worked for one of the big consulting firms. Right. She speaks 5 languages, including Chinese Mandarin. She lived in China for several years. She's very well traveled, and her husband couldn't travel. with her, so she gets a bunch of time off from work. So she came to South America, and she went to Uruguay, Buenos Aires, then out to Iguazu Falls, and to Rio. And in Rio, she had a tour guide that I set up, and before she had a tour in that took her from Uruguay up to Iguazu and then into Rio, right? And each Brazilian, because the Brazilian on the Uruguay branch of that tour, the guide, and the one in Rio, they're Brazilians. They're like, "Where are you going next?" And she goes, "I'm going to Porto Alegre." And they're like, "Why the hell are you going there?" And she goes, "Oh, my uncle lives there." And they're like, "Oh, you'll have a good time," right?
Mm.
And so she came here with some trepidation. She didn't know what to think, and she had being a good traveler, read what was being said about it, and she stated, "Hey, there's murder," and my sister was like, don't get my daughter killed coming to visit you, right? I'm like, she's gonna be fine, don't worry about it. And she was shocked. She said, "This is a European city. This is the most European city I've seen in Brazil. It's very much like Buenos Aires, right? And
Mm.
Buenos Aires is very European, right?"
Mm.
Um, the demographics of the South is very different. We're very German here, and the Germans were here from the 1880s, right? Which most people think they're all just Nazis, but those guys came here because there was already a lot of Germans here. Because when slavery ended in 1880, Brazil went out and imported a bunch of Caucasians from Europe, Italians and Germans, right? And so they came here to the South. The Germans came here predominantly. Um, and so, I mean, Porto Alegre, the city is the most mixed city in southern Brazil, ethnically. Um, but it's very Caucasian. I think officially it's like 90% Caucasian and 90 some odd percent Roman Catholic. And my niece left here, and I walked her all over this city. I was like, literally, we're gonna get in the Lotusao, the little private bus, better quality bus in town, and we're gonna just go out and we're gonna walk all over this city. So I took her all over, and she was literally like, "Oh my God, I had no idea this city existed. I would have thought." This city is very interesting, and it's on a trend up. And I have some insight because my wife's son, he's an architect, and he just
Mm.
graduated recently from PUCI, the basically the Notre Dame of Latin America, right?
Mm.
Um, of Rio Grande do Sul, and he sees all the future planned redevelopment of the city, and it's going to be stunning. Give it 20 years, it'll be an amazing city. I might be dead by then, but somebody's going to enjoy it.
You mentioned offline that you walk a lot. I think you said 15
Yep.
kilometers a day. Are you walking in the urban area or kind of on the hill that you mentioned, or what do you do that? Because a lot of people say that Latin America isn't super walkable.
I walk all over the city. I don't go out and search out hiking trails. I walk in the city.
Hmm.
When I came back after COVID, I decided I was going to continue living in Rio Grande do Sul. This would be my point of operation in Brazil. I used to think it was going to be Santa Catarina, right? And I have some stuff up there that would have been easy for me. But I love this city. This city's unique. It's very unique. For instance, do you remember an airline, the Brazilian airline Varig?
No.
Okay, well, you're not as old as me, but the first time they they were an international. They were the carrier before TAM, right,
Mm.
which merged with LATAM, right? Um, that started here. That started here, right? Uh, Dumont, which is the first guy to actually under power instead of sliding down a hill like the Wright brothers, under power took off,
Uh-huh.
from rolling wheels and landed.
Yeah.
First guy here in Porto
August
Alegre.
August Dumont, I think.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I think it's
What is it?
It doesn't matter. You know who I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, there was a
Here.
little museum in
It's here.
Iguazu.
But
Okay.
actually, the museum and the plane is here at Pookie in the Museum of Science and Technology, right?
Hmm.
We have a very big literary tradition. We have a cultural museum downtown. The big pink used to be the Hotel Majestic downtown, and it's 5 floors. It's wonderful. We've got a beautiful old cathedral on top of the hill, right behind Centro. We have a big, beautiful, just got remodeled and then got flooded, and now it's still beautiful, but there's some mud stains on the walls. 8, 10 feet up the wall. Um, uh, Mercado Público. It's a phenomenal city. I love this city. So, I committed to walking. So I literally have walked from. Are you still looking at that map?
Yeah, I got the map. I love maps.
Okay, so if you look out at Price Bellas, right? If you walk
Praias
from there,
Belas. Avenida Praia de Belas. Okay, so right
okay,
downtown, right by the waterfront.
yeah, I walked from there all the way over towards Sartorio, which is the road that backs up on the airport.
Okay.
That's quite a distance if you're looking
Yes,
at the map.
Sertorio. Yeah, I see that. That is quite a
Okay,
distance.
then Sartorio breaks off and hits Assis, Brazil, and then comes into an area called the Triangulo, which is right by Cristo Redentor, the neighborhood,
Hmm.
and then that splits off. One of the branches is Baltazar, and I've walked all the way up to Alvarado, which is you know the beginning of the southern part, the southeastern part of town. I've walked all over this city. So clearly, I'm not the guy who's hanging out in an expat community. When I say this, if you know what you're doing, this city's safe.
Good. That's good to hear. So
Yeah,
it's basically just like because it's like a cowboy culture that it makes
it's
it
it's
unsafe.
it's weird, man. It's like I joke with my wife, like my niece. She's a black belt in kendo, Japanese sword fighting.
Cool.
And the first thing she said to me is, "Okay, Uncle Jim, I know you have amazing churrasco, right? Barbecue." I said, "Yes, we do, the best in the world." And she said, "But you guys also have the most amazing knives I think I've ever seen outside of Japan, like custom hand forged knives." And I said, "Yes, we do." And we literally shop for 3 days for really high quality blades. And the joke I have with my wife is, look, Porto Alegre can be dangerous because everybody has a knife and they all know how to use it, especially the women, right?
Ooh.
And our cowboys don't look like the Paulista cowboys, right? Who kind of want to look like Texans. Our cowboys look like weird Frenchmen, right? They got with a weird cowboy hat and like big, like, I don't know, how would you, weird pants, like pants that look kind of like balloons when the wind catches them, right?
Sure.
It's just and cowboy boots that don't look like a Western cowboy boot, and they've got that knife, right? And they probably have a whip. And people, there are people that dress like that every day here, and they're not going to like a theme park. That's what they wear. So yeah, there's a cowboy culture here, but it's not the cowboy culture you're expecting.
This episode of the My Latin Life podcast is brought to you in part by Crema Social. Crema Social is like TikTok for international dating. It's an app you can download right now on your phone, and 3 out of 4 people on Crema are single women. The app was founded in Colombia, so unsurprisingly, there are a lot of Latinas on the app, by the way. So how does it work? Crema Social is a social meal experience where you invite a hot girl for a lunch date via video call and food delivery. New concept, so you'll have to try it out for yourself, but this is probably the best way to meet Latinas before you visit the country. So if you're in Latin America or planning to visit Latin America, download Crema Social now and start getting dates right away. There will be a link in the description to download, or just search Crema Social on your favorite app store. Have fun, guys. This episode of the My Latin Life podcast is brought to you in part by BitRefill. BitRefill is the best way to spend your crypto in Latin America. Purchase gift cards or mobile refills from more than 3,500 brands in 186 countries instantly, safely, and privately. You can also apply the code MyLatinLife at checkout to get 10% back on your first purchase. Go to bitrefill.com for more information. This episode of the My Latin Life podcast is brought to you in part by Job Stacking. If you are a remote or hybrid worker looking to maximize your earning potential, then Rolf Holze, the author of Job Stacking, guarantees you'll be able to double your income. This is the exact system Rolf has used to take his own income and those of many others beyond $20K a month. So what is job stacking? It's this idea of working multiple remote jobs. You might have heard Rolf, he's worked 5, 7, even 9 remote jobs at the same time before. And by the way, job stacking works equally well for non-technical roles. So no, it's not just for the nerds. So if you're ready to job stack, then book a discovery call with Job Stacking and see how they can double your income in just 9 weeks. In the show notes in the description, there will be a link where you can book a call directly on the Calendly of Job Stacking and be talking with them as early as tomorrow about how to double your income as quickly as possible. And the rest of the state, is it culturally similar than Porto Alegre, or sometimes the city and the province are quite different culturally, but I would think they're sort of similar. They're both gaucho, or
Yeah,
you tell me.
they're very similar. It's much more Caucasian when you get out of the city. Like if you go to Gramado's, you would swear you're in.
Right. That's where they do the Oktoberfest, right?
No, that's up in Blumenau. The big giant one's up in Blumenau. But yeah, the best Oktoberfest here is Gramado has a good one, but the one that I like the most is Santa Cruz do Sul. It's only a city of like 200,000. So if you're looking at the map, you're gonna
Santa
get
Cruz
the
do
location.
Sul. I haven't heard of this one.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. This
Yeah,
one cool.
it's very German. It's super German, right? Wonderful beers. That's the other thing. Culturally, we have a wonderful beer culture.
And
wine, right? Here, huh?
And wine, I think.
Yeah,
from the
that's
Italians.
The other one. If you go out to get a Balgi or a Bento Gonzalez, that's our wine region. We have wine here.
Yeah, I definitely noticed this because, sorry to interrupt, when I'm in Mexico, the beer kind of sucks because it's just all, Modelo and Tecate and all that. When I go to Paraguay, I'm like in beer heaven relatively because they have all the German influence in Paraguay. And so they have lots of really good beer, and the convenience stores have like a great selection of beer, and it's not all just flavorless lager. So I bet it's even better where you're at.
Yeah, it's interesting because we have the traditional, German beers here, and then we have a whole craft beer movement. It's like you live in California, right? So going back to your question, compare the cultures. We have a beer culture here that's like California. Like you can get amazing IPAs here. You can get amazing oatmeal stouts here. You can get amazing beers, period. Right?
Damn, you make me want an oatmeal stout.
Yeah, and then like your comment about, do you drink chimarrão, right? Yeah, but here's the other thing. I prefer Costela than picanha when I go to churrasco, right? Ribs, because that's the preferred cut here, right? I don't eat pão de queijo with my churrasco. We eat
I love
fried
queijo.
Yeah, that's for breakfast for dinner as a snack. We eat fried polenta with our churrasco. like literally fried polenta sticks. My niece was like,
What's
"Oh my
polenta
god,
again?
it's like Italian cornbread, right?"
Oh,
And then
okay.
like so we'll have that. We'll have uh, a potato salad, mayonnaise, right? We'll have uh, pau d'alho, garlic bread, all of it cooked over charcoal, wood charcoal, right? All of it, yeah. And then we don't eat linguiça. We eat salsicção, which is like the grind on it somewhere between the very fine linguiça grind and the Argentine chorizo, which is very coarse, right?
Hmm.
And then uh, calabresa, spicy Italian. Those are our sausages. We're just a little different.
Random question: do you own a car?
I do, but it's not here in the city. Yeah, here in the city, I have no reason to have a car,
Hmm.
right? And I can get out to the ag in 15 minutes, and I can tell somebody to come pick me up, and I'll get my car and go.
You
Yeah,
leave it like in a garage outside the city?
no, it's out on a farm.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, I, I very much believe in being self-sufficient, and so that's part of my life.
And
I'm not a
the idea
farmer.
is just that you don't have a garage at your house, or why do you do that?
No, I just there's no need. The public transportation here is wonderful.
Okay.
I can literally walk out my door and I can get on a bus, an omnibus, right? Um, I prefer not to. They're 5 reais, so $1 anywhere in town, right? Or if I have my pass, I can use a pass. I prefer just to pay cash. I don't like digital money. I just want to pay cash, right?
Mm.
Um, or I can take the Lotusao and that's 8 reais, so it's $1.60 anywhere in town, right? And the difference is the omnibus. I've got to stop at the defined stops. The Lotusao, I
Hmm.
can I can just tell them to stop. I'm getting off, right? It's just the level of service is better, and the air conditioning always works
And they have
in the
Uber, right?
summer.
They have Uber in
Yeah, we
Porto
got
Alegre.
Uber. Yeah,
Yeah,
we got
so that's
Uber.
probably
No problem.
super cheap, less than $5 to get anywhere, I'm sure.
Let's see. If I wanted to go to up against the lake to the southern part, which is about as far away from me driving wise as you can get, 32 reais. So
Yeah,
it's five
like
and a half reais to the dollar. So it's like
six, seven
six
bucks.
dollars.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Cost of living. How much do you think you spend per month? What's a good
It's funny
budget to have?
because I'm cheap. I like to keep my money, right? So um, most people aren't going to live the way I live. I could live very, very, very well for 1,500 a month. Very well, right? I could be eating churrasco. I'm not going to go to the restaurants. I'll go to my asoki, which is a kilo. You know what a kilo is?
No.
You just buy. They're spinning the meat there over
Uh,
the flames, but it's also a butcher shop, and
okay.
so it's like 30 feet of cooking meat every day, right? Twice a day on Saturday and Sunday, and yeah, just Saturday and Sunday. And so I'll walk 5 minutes over there. I know everybody in there, and basically get whatever cuts I want, as much as I want, and walk it home and just I'll have churrasco for the weekend in the house if I don't want to cook it. So and that would cost me feed a family of five with leftovers 140 reais, so 20
Yeah, 30,
30
30 something
bucks.
bucks
Yeah, less
for
than 30 bucks
for
at today's
steak for
rates.
5 people.
Yeah, yeah, like that would get me 4 pounds of again, we like our ribs, so there'd be a steak choice and a ribs, right? Costella. And then there would be the garlic bread, the fried polenta.
Oh,
Um,
it comes with all that stuff for the 140
for that
reais.
price, yeah.
Good.
You're
Good.
buying it. It doesn't come with it. You're just buying what you want, right?
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
just
yeah. You're
going on
just
what I
picking
buy.
stuff out.
Yeah, I
Okay.
mean, if you wanted to live in Moinos and, 5 bedrooms or whatever, you're probably going to go in. I heard your Brazil roundup. I think it was you guys
Round
were.
table.
Somebody
Yep.
said 10,000 a month, right? And I'm like 50,000 reais a month. Oh my god, you could live like a rock star.
Yeah, I think that was a for like Sao Paulo, super high end type
Yeah,
lifestyle. How much do you
yeah.
think it would cost to rent like a four-bedroom house in Moinhos, the best area?
You're probably 8,000 reais a month.
8,000 reais, like $1,300, something like that.
Yeah, yeah, could be 10. It depends on the level of amenity and the age of the building. Like some of the new buildings, I was looking at conceptual stuff, like not built yet, but
Mhm.
they're totally enclosed. Freshwater lake, lazy rivers. You float around on, and the whole shot. 6 bedrooms with separate maids' quarters, giant kitchen, but they want 1,200,000 American with a view over all the river, right?
Mm.
But why would I want to replicate that? If anything, we should have learned is live comfortably, right? You don't know what the future is going to bring us. Live comfortably, be happy. Be responsible for ourselves. That's one of the reasons I walk. I've taken off since my heart issues. I mean, I'm a self admitted corporate refugee. Um, I've taken off. Let me think of this. I At my worst, I was 260 pounds. Today, I'm 187 pounds. All mostly from walking, right? And I train jujitsu too. So
I'm all about the walking. Audience,
yeah,
download some episodes of the My Latin Life podcast. Go for some walks. Get your 10,000 steps in.
yeah.
It's,
I
it's a
average
must.
about I average between 17 and 22,000 a day.
Wow, that's
Yeah,
huge.
but it's I listened to all your podcasts when I was walking, right?
Yeah, it's like, where's James? Oh, he's on another 4 hour walk.
Yeah, no, but or I do my phone calls and all of that, and quite frankly, we need to be You hear people talking about, well, how's the healthcare? Da 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 da. Okay, my healthcare. If I really need healthcare, I'll go to Sao Paulo, like really high, the highest quality in the world healthcare. I'll go to the Albert Einstein Hospital in Sao Paulo, right? But you'd have to do the same thing in the United States. You'd have to go to the Mayo Clinic, or you're probably going to go to one of the big centers, right? But at the end of the day, what matters is having access to doctors, which I can see. I can see a specialist probably tomorrow. I could call his office and see him tomorrow, where
Mhm.
you don't get that with the U.S. healthcare system at all anymore. And it would cost me 100 American to see a cardiologist, right? So, but what's more important is that we take responsibility for our health, because really, when we talk about healthcare, we're talking about sick care. We don't see doctors until we're sick, right? And so we need to take care of ourselves. We need to start changing that way of looking at the world. We need to be more involved with the places we live. We need to produce our own food. Technology is changing so fast that energy is becoming easy. And I can't wait until Starlink direct to cell finishes its rollout. It started in January of this year, and soon I'll be able to have a telephone that
Mhm.
T-Mobile and everybody else can't turn off. Now
Mhm.
Elon could, but he's he's showing his good side. Could he get evil? Well, yeah, he could get evil, but
By the way, my next call got canceled, so I can run a couple minutes over. Um, I wanted to know just kind of your calculus on living in California versus living in Brazil. Obviously, you could go back and live in California, and you could probably sponsor your wife or something. Um, would you ever want to do that, or do you think like what's the calculus there for you?
no, never happened. Period. My quality of life here is better than it is in it ever can be again in California. Ever. Even in the description of I live in a murder capital, one of the murder capitals of the world. Yeah, well, okay, whatever. I don't believe that there is any quality of life left in the United States, and I think that trajectory is nowhere but down, and I think it will continue that way at least for the next 20 years. I think we are at an inflection point. I think Ray Dalio's right.
Mm-hmm.
There is. Are you aware of what's going on with the BRICS Bank?
They always say they're like gonna, make
It's
a
going
currency
to be
or whatever,
live.
but
No, it's going to be live. You're not. I don't know. I hear everything, right? I mean, geopolitics is the other thing. If you're an expat, you better be studying geopolitics, okay? Because there's a lot of places in the world you might not want to be if things play out the way I think they're gonna play out. But I will tell you this, I like Bitcoin. I'm not a big person into Bitcoin. I like the fact that it allows me more control of my money.
mm-hmm.
Economic sanctions and the SWIFT system has shown that dependence upon that system means you don't control your own money. They can turn you off anytime they want to, right? They do it with countries that you don't think they're going to do it to you, then you're confused. And if you look at Canada, what happened to those guys that, sent money to the truckers on the protest? They got shut out of their accounts, right? Yeah. So I'm happy that Brazil has finally made a decision. I mean, the BRICS was a marketing thing for an equity company in the UK. That was the emerging countries fund, the BRICS, right?
Yeah, it was like Goldman Sachs just like spun up a fund and gave it a name, something like that.
Yeah, but today it is a fully functional bank. The BRICS has announced that they're not accepting everybody that's applied because they want to get an onboarding process so that they stay on their mission. And they are now currently doing Bitcoin. I'm not going to say Bitcoin. What's the technology? Help me, my friend. Blockchain. They're now doing blockchain central bank to central bank transactions in their native currencies. No cambios involved. So if China wants to buy petrol from Brazil, they interact with their central bank. Their central bank uses the functional today BRICS Bank to send the money in the blockchain currency that is only for the banks to use. They send it to the Brazilian central bank, and the money is transferred in reais into the petroleum company's account, right? And it happens in seconds, right? So
let me ask you a question. You don't have to answer this if you don't want, but are you a Brazilian citizen now?
Yes, I am.
So dual citizen.
Yeah, and there's something else that people don't understand. Because I have a Mercosul passport, right? I can just show up anywhere I want to in a Mercosul country and get permanent residency within a week.
Yep.
I just got to prove that I'm not a criminal.
This is true.
But you rarely hear any of the, and forgive me, expat experts that actually say that out loud.
That you can do that? That you can go use the Mercosur passport to go to different places?
No, you can, but that you can get residency.
Yeah. I mean, we talk about it on Twitter all the
time. Congratulations.
We help people do it.
I'm not going to, people that know my name know that I was involved with, I was an admin for another expat expert group, right? In their Facebook group. And I was invited. I was never an employee. And I never heard, I didn't hear that until the last couple of months. And I was there from 2020 on, right? People just don't, sorry. There's just this weird thing that goes on with South America. It's like, it's too far. Yeah, okay. For most people, an 11-hour flight from the United States to Sao Paulo is too far. But there's a level of freedom here that you don't get. That's EU level of freedom. In fact, it's better than EU because they can decide if they want to give you permanent residency or not. Right? My understanding in the UK, sorry, the EU, it's not
Yeah, I mean,
automatic there.
I actually had a client call yesterday with a guy who has a Colombian passport and he wants to go down to Argentina and get Argentina residency, work towards the Argentine passport, and obviously he gets instant residency.
Yeah,
So yeah,
yeah. I mean, there's so many advantages. I mean, I was on another podcast. I was like, it happened by happenstance, but there's some hot spots in the world, and I'm somewhere between 10 and 14,000 miles from any of them, and nobody else can say that, right? There's very few places in the world that you can say on average I'm 10 to 14,000 miles away from flashpoints.
right. There's no nukes pointed at Rio Grande do Sul.
No. Uh, Here's the funny thing. It's kind of a joke, but if there was, it'd probably be somebody up in the northeast of Brazil aiming it at us because I was coming across stuff in the comments of videos that I was sending to friends saying, "Hey, look, this is how bad it is here during the floods," and they're like, "You deserve it, you guys. You deserve it. You think you're better than everybody else in Brazil," and I'm like, "What are you talking about?" So yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, but yeah. So back to your, what else do you want to know about where the murder capital of the world?
Well, on what you were kind of saying about the 11-hour flight, we haven't reached the limits of how fast planes can go, right? Like planes have only been around for, well, like we talked about Dumont, and by the way, his name is Alberto Santos Dumont.
Yeah,
I looked it
Santos.
up.
Yeah,
So, um, but I think planes are going to get faster, and when they do, and when Brazil is only say a 4 or 5 hour flight, like if they can make the planes twice as fast,
yeah.
like, dude, South America is going to get way more popular once that distance gets cut down a little bit.
Okay, so I will agree with you from a technology perspective that you're 100% correct. Okay, and in fact, if you look at that technology, if Boeing could ever get their technology right and get those guys off the space Skylab or whatever it is,
Yeah,
that technology would get you here in like 45 minutes,
yeah.
right? But I don't think there's a high probability that the geopolitics that of the next 20 years is going to allow that to happen when it in a short time in a time frame that is as short as the technology getting to that point. I think that's the other thing we're dealing with now.
I think the world's going to get smaller. Obviously, prior to the 1940s, the Germans and the Italians that came, they came on, you know, on boats and shipping. So I think I don't know. I think eventually it'll be faster to get to Brazil in the Southern Cone.
Let me throw this one at you. You're in the you assist people in getting residencies and all that, right?
We do.
That's becoming harder, isn't it? Or more expensive, isn't it? More restrictive.
Harder and more expensive, yeah.
I don't think that trend's going to stop for the next 10 years, 20 years.
Meaning you think it's going to keep getting harder.
Yeah, it's going to get harder.
Yeah.
I think as the economics and the geopolitics of it, and people get a little more aggressive with their neighbors, you know, I'll point to the Middle East, potentially Taiwan, the Ukraine. As that kind of behavior goes, people are going to get a little more protective of what they got, and so I think that will be the other thing that slows how fast people. I would love personally, between you and I, if you're not a criminal, I think you should be able to go anywhere and live anywhere you want to. It's the right of anybody born on this planet as a human, right? But that's not how the game's going to be played. The way things are structured is kind of an artifact of a feudal system, a tribe. And all this is, I think that before we could ever see anything like that, and I'm not a utopian type person, right? But I don't see why Vance, you can't live here in Porto Alegre with me and not have to ask more. All you should have to do is prove that you aren't a blight or a negative to the society. And I don't think visas are issued that way anymore. I think they're done for political reasons.
Yeah, I think part of it is the visa system or the residency system was sort of it's still operating on the rules that were put in place before everyone got really really mobile with
Yeah,
digital nomad stuff and working online,
yeah,
and it's gonna have to like adapt to the fact that people are super mobile,
yeah,
and so I think big changes are underway. I think the trend is absolutely that it's going to get harder. The minimum investments are going up um, everywhere. You mentioned Panama used to be able to get in with the 5K bank deposit. Now you have
yep.
to spend 400K, I think, or invest 400K in the country. Um, in Brazil, I'm sure it's gone up as well in terms of they have the Viper program where you invest in real estate. I'm sure if we looked at it, the number was probably less,
Oh yeah,
a
it was less.
while ago.
Yeah, and there
So
was all kinds of ways to get around. It was less formal. Like I've lived on a student visa for a while, studying
mhm.
Portuguese, right,
Nice.
officially.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, then it used to be the investment visa was easy. They would say, yeah, you got. I think it was back in the day. It's like 75,000, maybe 100,000 American invested in a company. Well, you, I can tell you that that balance never got here the entire time I was on an investor visa, right? Because all I needed to do was show a viable business plan and that I was working towards that.
Uh-huh.
And they would just, no worries, continue it, right? I don't think you can get away with that today. And I think that's the trend. I think that they're clamping down on immigration. I know, uh, from listening to Sam Miller's interview with you, he had problems, 2 week lapse, right? And it sounded like it was a bookkeeping part on the on the Colombian passport control guy's part. And yeah, okay, those kind of things happen now.
By the way, I
They
really
used to
wanted to
not.
ask, did you have to do a history test for your naturalization? Do you have to do
Yeah. What do
like
you
a
want to know
court?
about Brazil?
Yeah, was it hard?
It was harder than the one they give in the U.S. for people that want to become Americans. The other part is that if you really want to streamline it, prove you speak Portuguese,
Hmm.
right? And take the test, right? Which and prove that you're. There was a phrase back in the day. I had to show I had to show proficiencies in Portuguese
Hmm.
commensurate with my educational or professional potential, which, I had a master's degree from the University of California. I mean, it was a pretty high hurdle, right? And part of that, it wasn't just a written test. I had to sit there and talk to two Brazilian native speakers as part of the test for 30 or 45 minutes.
Mm.
And it wasn't a scripted, conversation. It was like, hey, how you doing? And it just,
Yeah, yeah,
here we go. You
yeah.
know,
People don't realize that these tests are pretty hard. I mean, the language test, you kind of got it or you don't. Obviously, you can study, but people don't realize how hard the naturalization tests are, the history piece of it, because
yeah.
you had to know the national anthem by heart. I'm not sure if and a lot of countries ask that anyway.
I will tell you this. I went to a graduation at Pookie, right, last week, and they played the second course, and I didn't know it. I mean, I was like, well, I don't know.
Just
Yeah,
the first
it's
stanza.
sort of like the Australian one, right? The Waltzing Matilda. Like when I was in college, one of my buddies had gone to Australia, and his drinking thing was when he would go to Australia, like, I'll bet you, I'm an American. I bet you I can sing your national anthem. I'll bet you're buying my next beer, right? And they're like, no way, mate. And he'd sing it, and then he'd go, how much if I know the second verse? And they're like, no one knows the second. And he just kept singing all of it, right?
That's a
And they're
good way
just
to
like,
get some beers anywhere you
oh
go. That's a good tip.
no shit, right? Yeah, so it's tough. Well, you got Paraguay experience. I understand the Paraguay, they get you on the language. Is that true?
So I can tell you for the
It's hard, I
audience,
know, to get it.
I did the Paraguay naturalization test. I
Yeah,
passed. It
yeah,
it was on the easier side. I did have to study. If I did not study, I would have failed. So I studied. I had to know the national anthem by heart, at
yeah,
least the first stanza and the refrain. I could probably still belt it out because I took the test not that long ago. Um, but yeah, I passed. It wasn't too hard, but it's in Spanish. Like you would have to know Spanish pretty
yeah,
much fluently, like 8 out of 10 minimum. But I've heard the ones for Mexico is even harder. I heard the one for Peru is passable, but quite hard, like really, really hard. Like most Peruvians wouldn't pass it. I heard the Colombian one is quite hard as well. So this
yeah.
is something that people kind of forget about. They think, okay, cool, I do my whatever 3 years of residency, now I'm eligible. But they need to keep in mind, like you have to speak Spanish. Um, you have to know the history. You have to be able to pass the test.
Yeah, again, that's if you want to live here and if you want to be a citizen, you need to speak the language. You need to be as Brazilian as you to be, selfish claiming everybody should be Brazilian. You need to be Brazilian as you can,
Hmm.
and most people just don't get that. They're like, my other pet peeve is, they should be grateful. We bring them up a lot of money into their economy. Okay, well, yeah, okay, thanks. That's not a reason for you to live here. That's not a reason for you to get citizenship here, right? And you're seeing pushback on the pay for passport game now. Like, what is it, the Comoros? The island nation off of Africa that
Yep.
you could buy your
Andrew
passport.
Henderson did it for like
Yeah, and
45K
now
or
the
something.
UK just says don't accept it.
Uh,
Vanuatu also, right?
uh.
Um, you see that all the time. People need to understand, assimilate. It is an investment. It is the path to freedom in a world where they want to separate you from the was it Klaus Schwab or whatever. We want you to own nothing and be happy. Okay, the only way you fight against that is having access, and it's really about food, energy, mobility, right?
Yep.
If you've got and your money, if you control those things, you're going to be as free as you can be. And then if you have the ability to plug in and out of different locations, more power to you, right? You've got freedom. I live here. In 4 hours, I can be in 3 different countries.
Hmm.
Well, a little more than that. Give me 8 hours. I could be in 4 different countries, right? I mean, who else can say it? You can't say that in Canada or the United States. I mean,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know,
Well, Brazil's huge. Brazil's friggin' huge.
yeah. I mean,
Oh,
people don't get that either. How much time have you spent here?
I've been a couple times. Yeah,
Yeah.
I haven't
Okay.
really been to the south though. Furthest south I've been is Iguazu, I think, or Sao
Yeah,
Paulo.
Paraná. Yeah, yeah. Actually, I gotta be careful. My wife might hear this. I used to have a Paranense girlfriend. Yeah, I mean, I know that area really well. I used to go. How were you on the Brazilian side or were you on the Paraguay side more?
I've been the Brazil side.
But as far as approaching the area, were you coming in from Brazil or were you coming in from Paraguay?
I've always, well, when I go to Iguazu, I come from Paraguay,
Okay. Yeah, because I mean, I made that drive from
from the
Santa
coast or
Catarina
whatever,
through
from Curitiba,
Curitiba.
Curitiba
Yeah,
to Iguazu. That's a long
yeah,
drive.
but I also went to a farm out by Toledo, right? A little town, 4 buildings is the town, one of which is I think it was in Amsterdam, they call it would have a red light in it, right? um, um, Parola Independency, right? I mean, literally in the middle of nowhere, Paraná, right? And it was like, an hour from the falls. But I mean, dude, you're out in the sticks there in Brazil. There's nothing out there.
Brazil is huge. By the
Yeah,
way,
people have
random
no
question
idea.
as we get to wrapping up because I want to
Yeah,
be
yeah.
respectful of your time. The beach near Porto Alegre, which according to the maps, the nearest one is what's it called?
Xanadu or yeah, yeah, they
Anyway,
suck.
so
When you
the
want to,
beach out there, is it swimmable? Is it cold, the water?
oh yeah, it's Florianopolis and more so, right? So it's
So
cold.
Balneario Pineal looks like kind of the most direct east from Porto Alegre.
Yeah, if you want to
So,
go to a good beach in Rio Grande do Sul, there is one. Okay,
okay.
Torres, up on the border with Santa Catarina,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Torres?
Yeah, it's literally on the north end of that town. There's a river mouth, and
Mm-hmm.
that river mouth is the separation between Santa Catarina and Rio Grande do Sul. And
Yep, I
there's
see
a
that.
there's a rock on the ocean there, right?
I see that.
That is the best beach in Rio Grande do Sul. The rest of it, have you been to California?
I have.
San Diego area?
Yep, I have.
Okay, you know the lagoons behind the beach there?
Oh man, I don't remember everything. I remember seeing sea lions and
Okay,
stuff though
but
in
basically,
La Jolla.
basically, there's a body of water, an estuary, and then sand. Right? There's really nothing there than sand, and that sand is at the whim of nature, right? And so that's what the beaches are here, south of Torres. Because if you look at all the lagoa, right, all the lagoons
Mm-hmm.
behind that, giant lagoons,
Mm-hmm.
they're not really pretty. There's a lot of estuary water entering the ocean, so there's a lot of brown ocean.
It's big gunky. Right.
Yeah,
Where anywhere there's like a mouth from the Lagoa is probably big gunky. Okay, but overall, it's like the water temperature and everything's good. I mean, it's like, isn't it the longest beach in the world near there? I think that's a little bit further
yeah.
south, something like that.
It probably is from Torres all the way to Uruguay is just a sandy beach,
Yeah, the whole
right?
state.
Yeah. Um, yeah, the water temperature here in the winter is low 60s Fahrenheit. So full wetsuit if you're a surfer boy like me from California, right? Not as cold as Northern California. In the summer, it will go high 70s for a few weeks, but you're not gonna be swimming in the ocean here year round like you are up in Hio,
More of a summer thing.
right?
Okay. So I guess
Yeah.
people should probably try to time their visits to go in Brazilian summer, which is obviously the opposite of North America, November to
If
March.
somebody wants to come here, I'll tell you when to come. Okay.
Okay.
You want to come in anytime after Carnival shuts down in the fall, anytime,
So
right?
Carnival is in February usually or early March.
It closes sometime early February all the way, I think, into early March, depending on the year,
Uh-huh.
right?
So best time to go Rio Grande do Sul is late March.
Yeah, if you want weather, okay.
Hmm.
If you want it, the if you if you don't mind the heat because it gets hot here, it gets humid here, right? But we typically are not over 40 degrees centigrade, right?
Right.
Um, it's usually in the 30s here during the summer during the day. Um, if you want to come to the city or the interior, great time to come because everybody's on the beach, right? I mean, the city's population cuts way down during the summer here, right? And it's cheaper because there's not a lot of tourists in town. But the best time to be here is I like September, which is the beginning of the end of our winter, because we have some wonderful festivals here, right? We have the celebration of our civil war against Brazil. In English, the Ragamuffin War, right? Um, and the big park here, Redenção, is a giant churrasco pit, right? With traditional dancing and singing, and from a cultural, it's spectacular. And if you can stay for a few weeks, then you're into the beginning of Oktoberfest. And we have some amazing Oktoberfests in the South.
I think that's when I would probably go is Oktoberfest. I think that would be the best time. Hit up all those little towns
Yeah, and then you
outside
can
the
come.
city.
Then you could hit Gramado, and Gramado.
Yeah.
Here's the other funny thing is that in the winter here we have white stuff that hits the ground. I don't know if I'd really call it snow more than ice,
I've seen the
but
photos. Yeah. People
yeah,
come from like northern Brazil to visit southern Brazil for the tourism of seeing snow.
yeah. And in Santa Catarina is the highest mountain outside of the drop of the Andes into the Amazon, right? And it's 5,000 feet, and I can't remember. It starts with a U. I can't remember the name of the city. I'm horrible with names and words, but most nights it's 0 degrees there, and it'll snow. It'll snow there. I mean, it's real snow, and it'll stick for 3-4 days.
Hmm.
Here we really don't have that much elevation.
Right, right, right. So, James, as we get to wrapping up, why don't you take this time, share any final message, call to action with the audience that you'd like to share, maybe where they can get in touch with you as well?
Let's see. Call to action. Uh, we live in a unique time in history, right? Technology. There's major changes coming. Financial world's changing. Uh, our ability to live separate, not be held hostage by pension plans and jobs and corporate, type of gigs. Um, get ready for it. Take advantage of it. Be open to it, but assimilate. Do your homework. Right? It's important that as Westerners, we don't build up animosity in the cultures that we want to live in. Right? And we're starting to see that in some locations. I don't see it in Brazil, but I've got friends that tell me about it, and I've been exposed to it sometime, once or twice in Mexico, mostly, Tijuana area, because when I'm in Southern California, I miss Latin culture and I'll just jump over the border. And I will tell you that when I've been given you know, the gringo just speak English to me, I don't like to be gringo, so I just start speaking Portuguese at them and tell them what you thought I was an American. I'm a Brazilian, right? And there's just this whole camaraderie that comes from being, you know, uh, Latin in the Latin world, right? Take off the American hat, the Canadian hat, the European hat, and embrace the culture you're in, and you'll find out that murder capitals aren't as bad as they seem to be on lists, and that you actually live in countries that have murder capitals inside them. Most of us, at least Americans, not Canadians or Europeans, most likely. Um, and enjoy life, man. You know, get, grab all the freedom you can. We live in a unique time that we can actually grab a ton of freedom. So, call to action that if you want to get a hold of me, um, James Lennertz at proton.me is my email direct. I will get back to you. I've got some stuff going on Substack. I'm going to start writing about Brazil and about the Southern Cone in particular, and about my experience in Panama and all that. And I will say that, James or Vance, I want to give you one thing. The Miami Vice look on your website is not my favorite. And quite frankly, after watching some of your or listening to your podcasts and stuff, your quality is very high. Okay, so maybe ditch the Miami Vice look. And I'm just saying that's just my value add to you today, and you can take it or leave it. But I've enjoyed this experience, and I've enjoyed the podcast. I'm actually got a couple hundred up there, and I'm probably gonna start downloading them onto my iPhone and listen to them when I'm walking all over Rio Grande do Sul as I expand outside of Porto Alegre. So I'll leave it with that.
Sweet, sweet. I appreciate that. And likewise, James, you really kind of put Porto Alegre back on the map for me. We were always kind of told it was a bit of a no-go zone, but I think this conversation really opened up people's eyes to that it's a great place and has a lot to offer. And I'm excited to go have some churrasco down there and have some good steaks. So
Look, I'll be honest with you, okay? I'm torn. I really don't want everyone to show up, okay? I really don't. But if you're going to come here, you in particular, you know how to get a hold of me. Just reach out. I'll make sure that you see the city for what it is, and you don't get murdered here, okay? And then that goes out to anybody else, or even if they just want to head towards the south and get out of Floripa. I've been up in the hills all over that state. And even if you just get across the bridge into Sao Jose and Palosa and up into the hills, Sao Pedro and all that, very interesting place. You need to get out. So anybody who wants to reach out, I'm more than happy to respond. If it takes me more than 24 hours, write me a message and tell me I'm a jerk, and I'll answer fast.
no, I know James is trying to keep a bit of a low profile, but we really appreciate you coming on. I know you don't do too many appearances, so we're really honored that you chose to make an appearance on the My Latin Life podcast. So thanks again.
Yeah, let me say one thing. Ivan, thanks to him, he's a good guy, and um, I told him a few months ago I was going to go dark for a while and focus on the things here that I wanted to focus on, but you know, I could be a better friend there, and I'll reach out to him soon. Okay, so
Shout out Ivan. Shout out Ivan.
yeah,
By the way, for the audience, the reason this kind of got put together is because we have a Telegram group. We actually have multiple Telegram groups with thousands of people. The primary one is called the LatAm Enthusiast Group. It's free to join. There will be a link in the description where you can join the Telegram group, and it's you'll be able to connect with people all over Latin America, fellow enthusiasts like yourself. So highly recommend anyone listening to this podcast to join the Telegram group. But with that, let's get out of here for today. This has been another episode of the My Latin Life podcast. Again, my guest today is James Lennertz, American expat in Brazil. Thanks to James for joining us. Thank you to the audience for listening. Please be sure to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. We put out 2 episodes a week with amazing guests just like James, and you won't want to miss an episode. Thanks so much.
thanks.
Hey guys, quick note at the end of the episode here. If you made it this far, you might be interested in working with My Latin Life personally to make progress on your internationalization plan. So whether the next step for you is getting residency in Latin America, lowering your taxes, choosing the best country, maybe a little birth tourism, whatever the next step is for you, of course, My Latin Life can help. We've helped people in their 20s, their 40s, their 60s, because I truly believe that Latin America has something to offer people at every stage of life. So if you want to become our VIP client, if you want to work with Vance, myself directly, book a call. There will be a link in the description. There will be a small fee for the initial consultation, and we do that to filter out the time wasters and focus on the best of the best clients. But if you're listening to this podcast and you made it all the way through the episode, I know you're the best of the best. But we're ready to work with you. So book that call. Hope you enjoyed this episode of the My Latin Life podcast, and we'll catch you in the next one.